Causes of France's defeat at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Hello everyone, welcome to the Vietnam War 360 channel. Today, we will explore the reasons behind France's defeat in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. To gain the initiative, one must occupy Dien Bien Phu. With this ambition, the French colonialists were determined to turn Dien Bien Phu into the strongest fortified base in Indochina. An impregnable fortress intended to crush the fighting spirit of the Vietnamese army. For the past 60 years, I have never stopped asking myself, why did France lose at Dien Bien Phu? This is the confession of Colonel Jacques Eller, a lieutenant of the 6th Parachute Regiment at Dien Bien Phu. This is a question that everyone wants the most comprehensive answer to. There are many political reasons, but from a military perspective, there are two profound and strategic reasons for France's defeat at Dien Bien Phu. The first reason is that the supply lines were cut off from the beginning, when airports like Cát Bi and Gia Lâm had been destroyed by Vietnamese special forces beforehand. The Vietnamese army recognized that to attack and crush the defensive system of Dien Bien Phu, they first needed to cut off the enemy's supply lines. The attack was carried out in both the takeoff and landing areas of the French. The two supply airports for Dien Bien Phu were Cát Bi in Hải Phòng and Gia Lâm Airport in Hanoi. Vietnamese special forces had been meticulously trained and prepared, and they ultimately succeeded in destroying 59 French aircraft. This is the first reason that led to France's defeat at Dien Bien Phu. The second reason is that the French army could not concentrate on the forces on Dien Bien Phu, but were dispersed across 6 other strongholds. This dispersion made it easier for the Vietnamese army to defeat them at Dien Bien Phu. At that time, France had a total of 7 strongholds in Indochina. Dien Bien Phu was just the strongest one. This is the most profound reason for the victory at Dien Bien Phu, and it has significant strategic implications. Actions like digging trenches and shelling were only minor tactics. Ho Chi Minh's genius lay in his ability to assess the battlefield and devise strategies to disperse the enemy's forces, allowing the Vietnamese army to defeat them piece by piece, preventing the French from consolidating into a single mass. When the Vietnamese army simultaneously attacked the remaining 6 strongholds, the enemy could not concentrate the forces at Dien Bien Phu. This is something that General Navarre himself had admitted. More than 80% of the French mobile forces were dispersed throughout the Indochina battlefield. When the Viet Minh launched an attack on Dien Bien Phu, our mobile forces could not concentrate to respond. For these two reasons, General Võ Nguyên Giáp became more confident in his fight-to-win strategy, ensuring the Vietnamese army's mission of a certain victory. General Giap's strategy had 5 advantages. Firstly, it allowed the Vietnamese army complete initiative, enabling them to attack whenever and wherever they wanted. The Vietnamese army would only attack when they were fully prepared and confident of victory. Otherwise, they would not attack or would delay the attack. The second advantage was identifying the French army's weakness in supply issues. The longer the battle lasted, the more the enemy would suffer from attrition in manpower and weapons, and the more difficult it would become to transport supplies. The third advantage was the health of the army. Transitioning to prolonged combat posed a real challenge. However, if it was easy, it would be easy for both sides. If it was difficult, it would be difficult for both sides. There was no other way. The important thing was which side could persevere longer. At least in terms of health, the Vietnamese army had a much greater advantage over the French. Being outside, they could be proactive in everything, advancing or retreating, fighting or resting. In contrast, the French were inside cramped and suffocating bunkers and bases, which constantly strained their soldiers' morale, putting them in passive position. Moreover, the fighting spirit of the Vietnamese army and people was very high. They had a slogan, rather sacrifice to the last drop of blood than lose the country, never accept being enslaved. This optimism and belief in victory was the great strength of the Vietnamese army, despite fighting in difficult conditions and lacking in all aspects. The fourth advantage of the Vietnamese army was the weather. The longer the battle dragged on, the closer the rainy season approached, which would be very bad for both the Vietnamese and French armies. However, It was clear that the worse the weather got, the more likely the French fortifications could collapse. Water could flood their bunkers, and they would have to huddle inside, unable to move to dry areas due to the powerful firepower of the Vietnamese army. The fifth advantage was that the steady progress strategy was more suited to the Vietnamese army's capabilities. At that time, the Vietnamese army had only experienced combat in small areas. Now, fighting in larger areas helped them learn and develop their combat experience significantly. The remaining important issues for the Vietnamese army were logistics and artillery. How to bring these two to Dien Bien Phu? This was something the French army considered the main weakness of the Vietnamese army. General Navarre once commented, "General Z's forces will not be able to supply weapons, ammunition, and food. They must carry thousands of tons of supplies through hundreds of kilometers of defense forest to support a fighting force of about 50,000 people, an insurmountable challenge." Additionally, the French also constantly used reconnaissance aircraft to bomb the Vietnamese supply routes. At that time, the Vietnamese army came up with many ways to transport food to Dien Bien Phu. They used cars, horses, and elephants to move goods across rivers, rapids, and waterfalls. The French calculated that to transport 1 kilogram of rice 300 kilometers, it would consume 24 kilograms of rice along the way, making it impossible to sustain long-term combat. However, the French did not consider a means of transportation they themselves had produced: the bicycle. Bicycles were 10 times more efficient than carrying goods on one's back, were small and easy to camouflage, simple to repair, required no fuel, and could travel narrow paths. In a country that was still impoverished and had only one recently gained independence, mobilizing nearly 21,000 bicycles to transport goods for the army demonstrated the tremendous spirit of solidarity among the Vietnamese people. In 1954, a Peugeot or Lincoln bicycle produced by the French was a valuable asset. Trucks were provided by the Soviet Union, but bicycles were bought by the Vietnamese people, pooling the money together to purchase these bicycles and using their own strength to transport goods to Dien Bien Phu. Those who had more contributed more, those who had less contributed less, and those with the money volunteered to transport goods for the army. Each commune, district, and province contributed a part, spreading the movement throughout the country. As a result, a transportation team with nearly 21,000 bicycles was formed. This meant that, on average, for every 1,000 Vietnamese people, there was one Peugeot or Lincoln bicycle in 1954. In areas where people could not afford to donate bicycles, they ingeniously created wooden cars. Due to the scarcity of wood and the need to quickly assemble these cars for transportation, people even dismantled their ancestral altars, a sacred object in every Vietnamese household, to use the wood for making cars. This demonstrated the strong patriotic spirit of the Vietnamese people, a spirit that no enemy could defeat. This showed the immense power of the people. When united, the army and the people could overcome all hardships. The French were aware of the Vietnamese army's efforts to transport food to Dien Bien Phu. However, French experts calculated that the transportation distance of 300 to 500 kilometers would be too exhausting and unachievable, especially with the continuous bombing on all the roads the Vietnamese might use. They estimated it would take a month to transport 150 kilograms of rice to Dien Bien Phu. Meanwhile, the French could transport 5 tons of supplies from Hanoi to Dien Bien Phu in just 1.5 hours. At that time, the bicycles had been modified to carry loads of 200 to 300 kilograms. This was beyond what the French calculations had anticipated, but the Vietnamese army made it happen. The bicycle transport teams were also highly disciplined and professional, not spontaneous. They had mobile repair workshops. The rice transportation teams primarily moved at night. If they had to move during the day, they would camouflage themselves on roads that enemy reconnaissance planes could not fly over, as they had arranged anti-aircraft guns for protection. Everyone had to keep secrecy. Each transporter only knew the specific stage they were assigned to, not the entire route. The French only had a vague understanding of this Vietnamese transportation method, leading to their complacency. However, This complacency caused the lifelong regret for the French. As French Air Force Colonel General remarked, it wasn't aid from China that helped the Viet Minh defeat General Navarre, but rather the Puzzle baskets produced by the French, which, after being modified, could carry 200 to 300 kilograms of goods, and were operated by people who barely had enough to eat and slept on the ground covered with nylon sheets. General Navarre was not defeated by war machines, but by the intelligence and determination of his opponent. The story of transporting food was challenging, but it was nothing compared to transporting artillery. These cannons weighed tons, so how could they be brought to Dien Bien Phu? And even if the Vietnamese army could get them there, how could they hide their tracks? If the French knew that the Viet Minh could transport cannons up the mountains, the element of surprise would be completely lost. Therefore, the transportation of these large cannons also had to be kept secret. However, the decisive blow that caused the French to collapse at Dien Bien Phu was the heavy artillery, something the French never imagined the Vietnamese could transport there. On January 18, 1950, China officially recognized and established diplomatic relations with Vietnam, followed by the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries. This was a significant political victory. The Soviet Union and China then began providing military aid to Vietnam. That is why Vietnam had Soviet artillery and trucks at that time. China also provided expedited training for the Vietnamese army to know how to use and repair these weapons. At that time, the Vietnamese army had a total of 24 105 mm artillery pieces, 4 captured from the French and 20 supplied by China. The greatest surprise for the French was the Vietnamese army's ability to deploy 105 mm artillery. These guns had a significant destructive power. With a range of up to 11 kilometers, this capability made French planes vulnerable to attack. The French fortifications were only 6 to 7 kilometers within the range of the Vietnamese artillery, so a single shot from these guns could cause considerable damage. The Vietnamese army had 15,000 shells for these artillery pieces. So, how did they transport 20 heavy artillery pieces from China to Vietnam? The transportation of the artillery from China to Vietnam had to be kept secret. So the Vietnamese army proposed disassembling them and using rafts to transport them along the Red River to Yên Bái. From there, they would use trucks to transport the artillery to the battlefield. This proposal was unprecedented and seemed impossible, but it was the only way, and they were determined to achieve it. The Soviet-supplied trucks were crucial not only for transporting food, but also for carrying the artillery pieces. Without them, transporting the cannons to Dien Bien Phu would have been impossible. To maintain secrecy, the Vietnamese army had to drag the artillery by hand for the last 15 kilometers to the battlefield. The Vietnamese wanted to surprise the French with their heavy artillery, and if the planes were exposed, all their efforts would be in vain. The truck routes were very rugged and muddy, with bomb craters and landslides from the rain. The drivers, after training in China, practiced on these steep mountain roads. The support of the local people, who worked day and night to level the roads for truck passage, was also a remarkable achievement by the Vietnamese army and people. However, the trucks could only help to a certain extent. For the final 15 kilometers, the Vietnamese had to manually drag the artillery up slopes, thousands of meters high. The artillery pieces had to be spaced out 3 to 5 kilometers apart. For the 105 mm howitzers and the 37 mm anti-aircraft guns, it only took 30 people to drag them on flat ground. However, to move the artillery up the slopes, 200 people were required, divided into 2 groups of 100 each, to drag a single cannon. Each time they shouted "Haw" or "Zo Hai Ba now," the cannon would only move a short distance at a time. Pulling the cannons at night, in the darkness, with drizzle, and the cold weather of the northwest, did not deter them. The food rations for those dragging the cannons were increased to 1 kilogram of rice per day to maintain their strength. Lieutenant Colonel Paris, who commanded the French artillery, had promised General Navarre that after just 3 artillery shots from the Viet Minh, they would immediately be hit by bombs. To solve this problem, the Viet Minh constructed bunkers for their artillery to hide them. The artillery bunkers were designed deep within the mountains, with defensive structures for firing and hiding. The bunkers were spacious enough for the gunners to operate easily during combat, with thick roofs over 3 meters thick, consisting of many layers of wood, earth, and bamboo, capable of withstanding the energy released when the 105 mm artillery fired. When cutting trees, they did so far from the bunker to avoid detection by the French, cutting as few as possible to remain undetected. Along with the artillery bunkers, the Viet Minh also dug ammunition storage bunkers, mess halls, sleeping quarters, medical stations, and supply bunkers. They also dug trenches to connect the artillery bunkers, drainage ditches, and bomb shelters. Next to each real artillery position, they cleverly created a dummy position to attract enemy fire. When the real artillery fired, the dummy positions would also set off explosions and create muzzle flashes, to make it impossible for the French artillery and aircraft to locate the actual Viet Minh artillery positions. The French had positioned 30 105 mm howitzers, along with many heavy mortars, at the center of the Dien Bien Phu stronghold to concentrate firepower in any direction of attack. Their air force played a role similar to artillery in the air, capable of coming and going, dropping bombs as they pleased, since the Viet Minh had no anti-aircraft artillery or air defense. However, on March 13, 1954, the first artillery shells fell on the French positions, marking the beginning of the Dien Bien Phu campaign. Lieutenant Colonel Pyrrhus, a French commander, was astonished and panicked when he saw that the Viet Minh could directly threaten his position. He could not understand how the Viet Minh had managed to transport the heavy artillery, weighing over 2 tons, through forests and mountains without being detected. Most of the French shells had landed in well-fortified positions or hit the strongly protected defensive structures. Lieutenant General Harry Navarre, the commander of the French expeditionary forces in Indochina, recounted that the Viet Minh used a completely different tactic from their traditional artillery. They deployed each piece in individual bunkers that could withstand direct artillery fire. This approach disrupted all our predictions. After firing half of our artillery reserves without destroying any Viet Minh guns, we suffered heavy losses. Pyrrhus apologized to his officers and admitted that he had lost all honor. Just 2 days after the fighting began, this lieutenant colonel committed suicide with a grenade in his bunker. Pyrrhus' subordinates secretly buried him in the bunker to avoid causing panic among the others. But within a few days, somehow, the information was leaked through newspapers dropped by parachute, causing a rapid collapse in French morale. To advance deeply into the French strongholds at Dien Bien Phu, the Viet Minh implemented an ingenious strategy by digging extensive tunnel systems. Over the course of more than a month, they created nearly 600 kilometers of tunnels and trenches, including combat bunkers and logistical support areas deep underground. By doing so, they were able to seize and fortify various positions, which created significant difficulties for the French. Most of the French supplies dropped from aircraft were intercepted by the Viet Minh. The French were aware of these tunnels and, as a result, used napalm bombs to target them at night when the tunnel digging troops were active. Many Viet Minh soldiers perished in these attacks, often suffering severe burns and injuries. The excavation of trenches at Dien Bien Phu is a monumental architectural feat. It is a structure built with blood, sweat, and tears, not with ordinary materials. All of these reasons are what led to the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. For the Vietnamese, this was one of the most decisive strategic battles. It was crucial in making the naval plan fail and in crushing the colonial ambitions of the French. It led to the victory of the anti-French resistance. This victory was instrumental in completely shattering the French colonial ambitions in Indochina, ending their colonial aggression in Vietnam and the other countries on the Indochina Peninsula. That's it for today's video. How do you feel about the reasons I've outlined that led to the French defeat at Điện Biên Phủ? Please leave a comment and hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. See you in the next videos. Thank you.